It is almost midnight, and she is still in bed with her phone, scrolling through other people's lives and feeling her own grow smaller with every swipe. It had been an unremarkable Tuesday. She reheated last night's pasta in a bowl that still had a smear of sauce dried around the rim. She left half the dishes in the sink because the water had gone lukewarm, and she told herself she would get to them in the morning. A project at work had stalled that afternoon, not dramatically, just quietly, the kind of stall where nobody notices except the person carrying it. She had closed her laptop and told herself that tomorrow she would push it forward. Then she got into bed early, telling herself she just wanted to see what her friends were up to. That is not what she is doing. Under the thumb that keeps flicking upward, there is a version of her that is keeping score. The one who watches her Tuesday against everyone else's Saturday and decides how to feel. And tonight, that scorekeeper is losing. A promotion announcement, a kitchen renovation with marble the color of bone, an engagement ring shot from 3 angles, a half marathon time, a book deal with a cover already mocked up. Each image lands softly, and each one takes something with it when it goes. The question she thinks she is asking is, what are they up to? The question underneath is quieter and crueler. Why am I not further along? She does not say it out loud, even to herself. She just keeps scrolling, as if the next post might contain the answer, or at least a tie. When she finally closes the app, her life has not changed, but it feels thinner, as though the evening has been charged a tax she did not agree to pay. The phone goes dark on her chest, and then, in the dark, the room comes back. The reheated dinner still faintly on her breath. The unfinished project waiting behind tomorrow's alarm. The neighbor's dog barking in that same 3-beat pattern it always barks in. The water glass on the nightstand. The book with the bent cover she keeps meaning to finish. The heater clicking on. All of it suddenly feels like a kind of failure, as though the small, specific life she has been refusing to live all evening is still sitting there in the room with her, waiting to see whether she will ever find it worthy. Waiting, yes, but waiting for what exactly? She lies there in the dark, the phone now a dead weight on her sternum, and her eyes fix on the water glass on the nightstand. A half-inch of tap water, a lip print on the rim, the faintest whitish ring where the light catches it. She stares at it for a long time without knowing she is staring. The heater clicks on somewhere behind the wall, and for one strange second, before her mind catches up and files the moment away as nothing, the room itself becomes the event. Then the reflex arrives, the one that has been trained into her since she was old enough to want things. The reflex says, "This does not count. This is not a scene. This is filler between the real parts of a life." And the real parts, she has been taught, are the parts that would survive being cropped, captioned, and posted. Everything else is the waiting room. That is the contract she signed without reading. The contract that says ordinary equals failure, that a life is measured by what can be announced. The promotion, the ring, the finish line, the cover with the mocked-up title. Anything that cannot be announced is understood without anyone ever quite saying it to be nothing. Dinner that does not photograph, an afternoon that stalls, a Tuesday with a lukewarm sink. Under the contract, these are not life. These are the gray space between the moments when life was supposed to happen, and for some reason she cannot name, did not. She has a self she keeps polishing for the feed, the one whose Tuesdays would look good cropped and captioned, because an uncropped Tuesday does not feel like it would survive being seen. That polished self has spent the evening at the scorekeeper's desk. And underneath, unphotographed, there is the pile of plain hours she keeps shoving off the page. The reheated dinners, the stalled projects, the evenings that don't photograph, the slow parts she has decided are evidence of a life not really happening. She has spent the evening treating that pile as the enemy, as something to get past, as something to apologize for by having a better Wednesday. And here is the thing the contract hides, the thing the scorekeeper will never tell her. The greatness and the dailiness are the same fabric. They are not 2 layers, with the real one hidden above the fake one. They are one cloth, and the heater clicking on in the wall is made of the same thread as anything she has ever called meaningful. The laughter and the tedium, the ache of an unfinished project and the taste of reheated pasta, the barking dog with its 3-beat rhythm, these are not the shadow of a real life happening elsewhere. They are the substance. The undignified, sick, paltry dailiness is not the waiting room for meaning. It is the room where meaning lives, and has always lived, and will live after every announcement has been forgotten. This is the reversal no practice can skip. Until it lands in the body, every attempt to slow down becomes another performance, another item on the list of things she is supposed to be doing better. Gratitude becomes a chore. Presence becomes a pose. She can sit with a cup of tea and still underneath be measuring the tea against someone else's tea on someone else's morning. The gesture changes. The scorekeeper does not. And this is where most people mistake themselves. There is a difference between rejecting the ordinary and simply not yet recognizing it, and nearly everyone is in the second and believes they are somewhere past it. If asked, she would say, of course her small life matters. Of course the simple things are what count. She has heard that her whole life. She has posted it herself. But hearing it and feeling it are different countries. Her thumb kept swiping tonight precisely because the recognition had not arrived. A person who has actually felt the water glass as real does not need the next post. Her fingers kept moving because something in her had not yet been fed by the room she was already in. The cost of this is paid by the polished self first. She is the one who has to keep producing a life that looks like a life. She is the one who has to keep the uncropped hours hidden, even from the woman living them. She is tired in a way sleep does not touch, because she is running a performance for an audience that, it turns out, is also performing, also exhausted, also lying in the dark wondering why their Tuesday doesn't feel like the Saturday they see in someone else's feed. If the water glass and the heater were always the real thing, if the gold was sitting on her nightstand all along, just not looking like the gold she was hoping for, then what, exactly, has she been hunting all these years when she reached for something bigger? What she has been hunting is older than she is. It was installed in her long before the phone, long before the feed, long before any of the particular Tuesdays she keeps failing to win. There is a spirit in the air of her time, and its only instruction is ascent. Bigger, higher, brighter, more. It wears the face of heroic virtue and promises that if she climbs hard enough, she will arrive somewhere the waiting stops. It is not a personal flaw in her. It is the weather everyone is breathing. The trouble is that every climb needs something to climb past. In a world that still had visible edges, mountains that could not be moved, winters that had to be endured, limits that pressed back, the thing to climb past was nature itself. But her world has been told it has no edges. So the climbing reflex turns inward and finds a new enemy. The new enemy is the plain shape of her own life, the lukewarm sink, the stalled project, the Tuesday that will not photograph. The ordinary becomes the mountain she is supposed to defeat. And so every small hour of her life registers as a small failure. Not because the hour is a failure, but because the ascent machinery, having nothing else to push against, pushes against her. It tells her that the stall at work was not the natural shape of a hard problem, but a personal verdict. It tells her the reheated pasta is not dinner, but evidence. The refusal to accept limits does not make her life larger. It makes it shapeless. A life without edges is not infinite. It is unformed, liquid, unlivable, leaking out the sides of every container she tries to pour it into. The project she could not push through did not die because she lacked ability. It died because she refused to let it have a limit, a scale, a real size. She kept waiting for it to become the announceable version of itself, and in the waiting, it quietly went cold. What she refuses does not vanish. The smallness she keeps shoving off the page drops underground and waits. It comes back as the puffed-up trance of needing every week to register as a win, the altitude sickness of a self that keeps climbing because it has forgotten the ground is where people actually live. It comes back as the tiredness sleep does not touch. It comes back as the scroll. Every swipe is the ascent machinery hunting for a peak high enough to justify the climb, and finding only more climbers, which is why the scrolling never ends. Here is where the mechanism turns, and the turn is the only move that actually works. At her low point, something happens that the heights could never deliver. On the heights, she is alone. The mountain of her own becoming belongs to her and no one else. That is what makes it a mountain. But at the low point in the simple, exhausted evening, she is no longer distinct from her fellow beings. The neighbor whose dog barks in 3 beats is tired in the same way. The friend whose engagement ring glitters from 3 angles is somewhere behind the post, also lying in the dark, wondering why her Tuesday did not feel like a Saturday. The colleague who looks assembled is held together with the same weak glue. The lowest point is the only place wide enough to hold all of them at once. And in that wideness, she becomes a fish among fish, a frog among frogs. She stops being lonely on the mountain of her own becoming and steps into the holy stream of common life, the life that is always continuing, the life of history, the life every human being has lived under every sky. On the mountain, she was individual and busy becoming. In the stream, she simply is. And being, it turns out, is what she has been starving for. She thought she was hungry for more becoming. She was hungry for any moment in which she was allowed to stop becoming and just be here, in a room, with a water glass, with a heater clicking on. This is the inner correction the deeper self has been waiting to make, and it is not cruel. It is the sun withdrawing its rays to illumine itself after a long day of lavishing light on the world. The descent is not the opposite of meaning. It is the place where meaning finally catches up to her. It returns the solidity the ascent kept promising but could never deliver, because solidity was never going to come from altitude. It was only ever going to come from touching the ground. And now there is the deeper center underneath all the scorekeeping, the part of her that is not impressed or unimpressed by her Tuesday, that just wants her to actually live it. The scorekeeper cannot see it. The feed cannot photograph it. It has been waiting in the room the whole time, which leaves only the question of what the turn looks like in the body, in the next morning, in the way she pours the coffee. The turn in the body begins the next morning when she pours the coffee. Not in a grand resolution, not in a new plan, not in a better version of herself that she will unveil by Friday. In the way her hand meets the handle of the mug. That is the scale at which the deeper center can actually be met, and it is the only scale that counts. What follows is not a philosophy. It is 3 small moves, each of them available inside the ordinary evening she is already in. The first move is a single honest question, and she is going to need it long before coffee. It is the question for the moment her hand reaches for the phone, or the moment she opens a new browser tab, or the moment she decides to reorganize a drawer that does not need reorganizing. You know the moment. The body has not asked for anything. The mind simply flinches sideways. The question is this: am I avoiding this moment because it is actually empty, or because it is quietly full and I do not know how to receive it? Ask it once, say it slowly in the skull. Then name which of the 2 is true right now, in this one specific instance. Almost always it is the second. The moment is full and she does not know where to put the fullness, so she flees toward a screen. The shift is small and immediate. The restlessness loses most of its grip the second it has been named instead of obeyed. The hand stays where it is. The room comes back. The second move is the one to take into the rest of the life, and it is the center of everything that has been said. Tend your small garden on purpose. Pick one plain, unremarkable piece of the day that you have been treating as filler between the parts that count, and decide, quietly and without announcement, that from now on, that piece is the day. The trigger is that nagging sensation that real life is somewhere else, the pull toward elsewhere that arrives right in the middle of here. When you feel it, instead of trying to argue with it, hand the weight of the day over to one small thing: the morning coffee, the walk to the mailbox, the 5 minutes between sitting down on the edge of the bed and turning out the light, the way you close the laptop at the end of the afternoon, the rinse of a single bowl. Pick one. Let it be banal. Then treat it as the center, not the connective tissue. That means you do not rush through it to get to the important thing, because it is the important thing. You let your hands feel the warmth of the mug before you lift it. You notice the exact temperature of the air on the walk to the mailbox, the way the sidewalk smells different after rain. You put the laptop down with both hands. You watch the water go clear over the bowl. None of this is performance. No one sees it. No one knows you are doing it. That is the whole point. The scorekeeper cannot score what has no audience. And over days, not hours, the scale of the life begins to recalibrate. The evening stops being a waiting room. The life stops being something that will begin once a few more things line up. You are not trying to make the coffee meaningful. You are noticing that it already was, and you were the one who kept walking past. What shifts is not the coffee. What shifts is where the center of gravity in the day sits. It was in the feed, it comes home to the mug, and once it has come home, the pull toward elsewhere softens, because there is no elsewhere left to need. The third move is a single sentence held in reserve for the tight, bright moments. You know that voice, the one that wants to declare, to pronounce, to have the clean opinion ready before the question has even finished. Pitch rising, chest tightening, a readiness to sound sure. When you feel it, try the smaller, truer sentence instead. I am not sure. Say it out loud if the room allows. Say it silently if it does not. Then notice what room opens up inside the chest where the tightness was. What shifts is that humility stops feeling like losing. It starts feeling like weight returning to the body, the ground meeting the foot again, the posture softening, the breath finding its whole length. The people who are always sure are the ones who are most unsure underneath. The small sentence returns you to the kind of unsureness that is actually close to the truth of being alive. These are the three. A question at the threshold of the flinch, a small garden tended on purpose, a sentence that admits the ground. None of them require a new life. All of them are available in the rest of this evening, in the next hand gesture, in the next breath. The room she is in already contains everything she has been reaching past. So the only real question left is what it feels like afterward, not the day she starts, but the day she stops needing to be anywhere else. The day she stops needing to be anywhere else does not look like anything. That is the whole secret of it. She is back in the same room, on the same mattress, with the same heater clicking on behind the same wall. The phone is still off on the nightstand. The project is still stalled. The sink still has its lukewarm half. Nothing has been added to her life. Something has only been taken away. What has been taken away is the idea that the life she already has is a waiting room for a better one. That was the wait. Not the Tuesday. Not the dishes. Not the stalled project. The wait was the belief that these hours were the gray space between the parts that counted, and that somewhere behind the next milestone, the real life was still scheduled to begin. The climb promised altitude and delivered exhaustion. The descent promised smallness and delivered ground. Between them, a plainer truth. Smaller is not less. The scorekeeper was never going to hand her the dignity she was reaching for, because the dignity was never on the other side of a milestone. It was in the mug, in the walk to the mailbox, in the 5 minutes before the light goes out, in the sentence that admits the ground. She lifts her head on the pillow. Her eyes find the water glass on the nightstand, the half-inch of tap water, the lip print on the rim, the faint whitish ring where the light catches it. She looks at it, for the first time in a long time, without apology.